On September 27, 2011, over 100 guests gathered at First Unitarian Universalist Ottawa for the Edith Holtom Lecture Series. Ed Broadbent was the speaker for the 12th in the series, and he spoke on the subject of democracy, do's and don'ts. Edith Holtom's granddaughter welcomed the audience and shared the background of this impressive woman's life, and Minister John Marsh introduced Ed. This is an edited version of the 1.5-hour lecture and Q&A. To see the full video, please visit youtube.com/First Unitarian Ottawa.
Atomic bomb. During World War I, my grandfather was away serving in the war, and she was alone with 2 young children. One of her quotes was, "Being a mother of 2 small boys at that time, the thought that they might be called up by the government to murder other mothers' children haunted her and moved her to action." She was chosen at the Peace Conference in Vienna in 1952, and in 1950, Moscow, in 1962, Helsinki, in 1965, she was awarded International Peace Awards. As a granddaughter and a family member of the Holtom family, it is quite an honor to continue this legacy and to pay tribute to this very courageous woman by sustaining and supporting with you this lecture series. So thank you again for your support. Thank you to the congregation who continues to organize and really have brilliant speakers and lectures. We truly enjoy them, and we enjoy participating, and we enjoy supporting the fund and the foundation. Thank you so much.
Tonight we are blessed to have Dr. Ed Broadbent deliver our 12th Edith Holtom lecture. Ed started out his academic life in the study of philosophy and then in the science of politics. In 1975, he was elected leader of the federal NDP and led the party until 1989. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney appointed Ed as the inaugural director of the Ottawa Centre for Human Rights and Democracy. This past June, Ed founded the Broadbent Institute. He was the best Prime Minister we never had. It is indeed a great honor to welcome Ed Broadbent to this pulpit. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a very great honor indeed to be one in this series of, speaking for the past performers, distinguished lectures in the memory of such a great woman. I have been making speeches, I think, for several hundred years now, in every part of this country, in French, in my kind of French in any case, and English, big towns, little towns, villages. And in this whole period, I have always had my glasses. And the first time ever that I forgot them was tonight. Tonight. But there was, so appropriate to say, in this institution, the Good Samaritan in the crowd, who produced these drugstore glasses. And they are going to work. I do indeed welcome the opportunity to say something on tonight's subject, that is to say, offer some thoughts about do's and don'ts, what should or should not be done by developed democracies to encourage the development of democracies in other parts of the world. I want to begin my comments by emphasizing that democracy means much more than the periodic election of parties, parliaments, or presidents. The nature of the underlying society is what matters most. In short, the right social conditions are a prerequisite for democratic political institutions to emerge, and others must be present if it is to remain in a durable form. The answer of the wartime leaders was to ground it on 3 new pillars: the United Nations, the Bretton Woods financial institutions, and the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A system of rights that for the first time in world history included important social provisions as rights. Although a good deal of progress has been made since the signing of the Universal Declaration, which came in 1948, there are, for example, many dozens of new democracies. Nonetheless, the experience of a democratic order still remains merely a hope for the future in a majority of today's global population. It seems to me that the wartime leaders, better than many of today's politicians, understood that viable democratic parliamentary institutions will neither come into being nor prevail in a country unless there is already present a strong commitment to the values of tolerance, the rule of law, and basic human freedoms. In other words, something resembling a democratic civil society. In addition, we need to recall that the stability and ultimate success of democracy in post-war North Atlantic countries came with the emergence of tolerant civil societies embedded with the traditional freedoms of assembly, speech, and association, but also with the new rights of citizenship, the new social rights of unemployment insurance, pensions, health care, housing, and education. Nor should it surprise us today that the recent civil unrest in Greece, the United Kingdom, and Spain is occurring at the time that those social rights are under threat. Throughout the 1990s, as has been mentioned, I served as the founding president of the International Centre for Human Rights and Democratic Development. The mandate of that center was to work for the global implementation of the International Bill of Human Rights. The first year of rights and democracy coincided with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. I remember that at the time, almost all the heads of democratic governments proclaimed that both democracy and market economies would spread across the world before the end of the 20th century. Unfortunately, unlike the leaders at the end of World War II, the politicians of the 1990s put virtually exclusive emphasis on creating a global market. While most of us working on human rights at the time said they were wrong, the evidence was and remains clear. Legally enforced markets can prevail in a country side by side with the most glaring denial of human rights. Witness Chile under Pinochet or China and Russia today. Flourishing market economies with the complete denial of human rights. So how can Canada and other democracies promote democratic civil societies and parliamentary institutions in a world where the majority still live in countries with authoritarian governments? And I want to make a few suggestions. First, I believe that the encouragement of democratic development should remain an objective of our foreign policy. Secondly, such development should, however, be undertaken by persuasion, aid, fair trade, and the development of globally enforceable international human rights law. Third, democratic governments should attach a higher priority to assisting independent human rights and other non-governmental organizations. Fourth, we must remember that Canadians and other outsiders can usefully help in the peaceful development of democracy within another state only when the government of that state allows at least enough freedom, enough space to do so. This is precisely what has happened in recent years with varying degrees of success, I suggest, in a number of quite diverse nations such as South Korea, Thailand, Tanzania, Pakistan, Guatemala, and Mexico. The day that China permits freedom of association to its workers, freedom of speech to its citizens, and welcomes human rights NGOs will be a day marking a similar route to democracy in China. Fifth, agendas for the implementation of rights in a developing country must not be determined by outside NGOs or governments. Priorities must be set within that country. I want to follow and conclude, if you like, on a personal note. When I was a young democratic socialist or social democrat, a graduate student at the London School of Economics in the 1960s, it was my good fortune to enroll in a seminar conducted by the most important conservative of the age. I refer to Michael Oakeshott. Oakeshott warned of the folly of imposing Western institutions and values on other people. Only they, he said, can truly understand themselves, their traditions and institutions, and thereby find appropriate answers to their political problems. In the end, each nation must make its own decisions and innovations in the context of its own traditions, institutions, and particular circumstances. We should not be passive. We should promote the development of democracy and rights peacefully in the ways I've suggested. And to do this consistently and convincingly in this globalizing era, we should require not just Canadian citizens, but also Canadian corporations to comply with international human rights standards when they're abroad. But above all, we Canadians and other citizens of so-called developed democracies must demonstrate modesty and tolerance. Tolerance to accept that there is more than one legitimate road to democracy, and modesty in understanding that our priorities and particular institutions may not be the best for others. Modesty also in understanding that in the real world, the best of plans can have disastrous, unintended consequences. We must never, in the name of democracy, violate the fundamental rights of others in order to achieve our goal. Thank you very much for listening.